Welcome to the GTI Tours Podcast. Join us as we go behind the scenes and discuss with trip leaders, guides, biblical scholars, and more to bring the land and the lessons of the Bible to life.
Hello and welcome to the GTI Tours Podcast. My name is Rich and I'm going to be your host today as we dive into the land and the lessons of the Bible. This is a fun podcast because I just got back from a trip that blew my mind. And we get to travel to a lot of great places, and you always hear me say I love every place I'm in. But this one was different in the fact that I have not spent much time, hardly any. Actually, I've been to England one time in my life, and it was a layover when we were flying through Heathrow, and then we ended up going and seeing a show downtown off Broadway, and it was really cool. But this particular trip was one focused completely on England and Scotland. We spent our time there with a group, and we had a chance to dive into the lessons of the Bible. And you might be sitting there going, Rich, what does England and Scotland have to do with our Bibles? Well, it's got a lot. And that's where I was even just amazed at what I learned and saw. And it was a ton of fun. We had a group of people who went, who have majority are all GTI people who travel all the time with us. They've been on multiple trips. They have done all the different things that we have to offer. One particular person on the trip, I'm going to give a shout out to Oscar, has been on, I believe, every offering that GTI has as far as places you can go, countries and trips on the signature line. And so we had a group there who was wanting to try something different, something new. And so we brought on this trip to really jump into Reformation church history and how that applies to us today and how we can learn from it. So tons and tons of fun. So what I wanted to do today is I wanted to bring on my good friend, Adam Richardson, who was the one who led the trip. He was actually the brains behind putting it together. He had been, if you've watched some of our other podcasts, you've seen he had been pushing for us to do this for quite some time. And finally, I said, let's give it a shot. Let's give it a try. And we went and did it this October. And I couldn't have been more thrilled with how it went down. So we want to walk you through this trip, what we learned. And I can tell you right now, I'm coming away with a better understanding of just my biblical foundation, an understanding and appreciation for the preservation and the perseverance of the saints, and then also just the impact on culture as it has today and how I live my own life out. And I think that if you were to talk to any of the people on our trip, they would probably say many of the same things. So Adam, hey, welcome to the GTI Podcast.
Rich, thanks. That's a great introduction.
Adam, first off, big thank you. I mean, we pulled something off in a short amount of time. This was one of those trips where we didn't scout it. We did a bunch of research and we put it together, and it was fantastic. And it was all thanks to you. I mean, you did majority of the heavy lifting. So, man.
Well, we had a great time putting it together, and kudos to you and your team. Love GTI. Having been on a few of the trips before to Israel, I had a vision in my head of what y'all are doing, and I was like, that is exactly what we need to do in England and Scotland. The model was perfect for what our purposes were for, not just to see stuff, not to go, ooh, that's cool, but to actually think, why does this matter? And there's so many things that matter to us. We talk about standing on the shoulders of giants in our day, but rarely do we know who those giants are. Do we understand their significance? Do we know where to be grateful even, and where to remember and to thank God and to remember the past? And England has 1,800 years of Christian history. And that's not only significant for global Christianity, it's especially relevant for American Christianity because our pilgrims came directly from there and under a certain set of circumstances. So kudos to GTI and to you and your team for, you're right, when we said, okay, we can wait a year or do it now. Let's do it now. And I'm so thankful because you're right. It was a great first run, and we got some good experience, great context under our belt, and looking forward to running it again.
Yeah, I remember being over in Germany, and we had made our way into Switzerland, and we're sitting in Geneva, and we're talking Calvin, and Dan who teaches that trip. It was this cool moment where Dan says, "From here, reformers will go to Scotland. Reformers will head over, and the story continues." And I kind of stared at him, and I was like, the story continues. Story continues. So we got to go do the story. That was the coolest part, was we got to see how even going on the Germany-Switzerland trip really sets itself up to really set this trip up. And vice versa, you could do this trip and then go over and do the Germany-Switzerland trip. So it was was pretty cool.
And it's interesting you mentioned that, Rich, because there's reformers that were from England and went to Geneva. And in fact, they called Cambridge Little Geneva because of the reformers from Cambridge that went there, brought it back. And people like Erasmus, right? And other reformers who ended up in Cambridge, brought back from Germany. And that really became the seat under Thomas Cranmer and other reformers in England that became the pilgrims that became our forefathers. And so, I mean, there's a direct line right back through England and Scotland, right back to Geneva, and really back to the Bible.
There is. And this is where it gets fun. So let's walk through a little bit of what we saw. We're going to take it from the perspective of Rich Frere, first time going and doing all of this, and kind of what I took from it, but also just letting you kind of speak to what we learned and why these places were important. We'll keep it brief because you got to come on the trip. There's so much to unpack, and we only got a little bit of time to do it. So here we go. We're gonna speed our way through. First day, people landed, right? They came in and they went everywhere. They like cruised all through London. It was kind of the touristy day of like get to the hotel and then head out and go see all the things. I was amazed at all the things people saw.
Incredible.
Like I mean,
and there's so much to do in London. And that's, since the tour is starting there, I think most people came in early, stayed late, did whatever they did. We did. Mm-hmm. And you get to, there's immense amount from Westminster Abbey to Buckingham Palace. Then there's all in Tower of London. There's all the touristy things like the London Eye. I mean, you can't go wrong. And then of course there's the ancient pubs of London and the river cruise. And I mean, you can't go wrong. And the other good thing is if you ever get lost, everybody speaks English. So
that's a good thing.
Yeah, you're good to go.
Yeah, one day early. This is what we've been telling everybody. If you get an early flight, like my flight got in at like 6:30 a.m. I landed it into Heathrow, and then you make your way into London. You got the entire day. Like you might as well. You got to adjust to the time anyway. So taking a day to drop your stuff off at the hotel and then just go sightsee, it was fantastic. And then it set us up for that evening for an evening meeting. And then the first day, we're off on the biblical study tour portion of the trip. It's a really great mix of being able to come in. And some people came in a day even earlier than that and went and hit some other sites because you can take like their rail system, the tube, you can go anywhere. So it's quite amazing.
Yeah. I mean, some people hit London. My brother-in-law did that. Other people, we went up to Cambridge and spent a few days there. Other people did the James Herriot tour up in Yorkshire Dales, and to see all of that. You're right. You can do easy transport around London. You can do regional to Cambridge and Oxford, or you can head out to pretty much anywhere on a speed train and be there in a few hours and then get back as needed.
Yeah. So our first real day of touring biblical things, we went to Cambridge. And Cambridge and Oxford are two places I've heard over and over again. You can't go through any academia and have not heard of Cambridge and Oxford. And a chance to go to Cambridge. But I didn't know the history of Cambridge. That's the thing. Like, you don't realize in the U.S., like, kind of what I call it older but newer history is. It's history that's like, 800 old, maybe a little bit older than that, but like it's kind of new history. And it's these places where academia really set forth just what we know today. And it all started from a religious standpoint. And so I think there was a lot that I took away of going there, of just hearing some of the stories of the people, one of them being Lewis, but that's a whole conversation we'll probably get into when we get to the Oxford part. But going and learning just about our faith over the years and the people who have come out of this area was amazing to me. And you lived in Cambridge for quite some time. So yeah, your thoughts on the entire place and takeaways from there.
Absolutely. Well, Cambridge is my hometown. You're right. It's my home turf. Loved it. Could have spent the whole trip there, but can't. There's so much. You're right. University founded 1209, so 800 years, and so much of world education has come out of there, and as well as clerical and church education. John Harvard, Cambridge graduate, and so many of our Puritans and so many of our religious heritage came out of Cambridge, and the impact is hard to even quantify. When you think about Watson and Crick, in the more recent areas, announcing DNA in Cambridge, the discovery of the double helix. But to me, what is powerful about Cambridge is that it is the home of the International Bible Society archives. Mm-hmm. And Cambridge has been a home to, it was called Little Geneva. It has been the site of multiple revivals through the centuries, and God has been at work there and done incredible things. And so it is a place where you can see the interaction between education and the church, none more directly than in The third largest biblical library in the world after Jerusalem and the Vatican is in Cambridge at Tyndale House. It is a research center, biblical library studies, and you've got Peter Williams there, the principal, running incredible projects, which are world-class biblical scholarship, and not just pushing the envelope on understanding the Bibles that we have today, but understanding the development of the Bibles, the reliability of the scriptures, and answering the arguments. C.S. Lewis said that good philosophy needs to exist. If for no other reason, then bad philosophy needs to be answered. And these scholars, all Cambridge PhDs at Tyndale House, Peter Williams on the ESV translation committee, a good friend of mine, David Instone Brewer, on the NIV translation committee, all out of Tyndale House. They are right at the center, at the core of the Bibles that we hold and read, and understanding what went into them, that they are reliable. And what I love about this center is that Williams and David, both of them and their whole staff, they're in churches every Sunday worshiping the Lord. They know everything about our scriptures and they understand it's reliable and true, and they lay that out for us. So it's not just about, dusty halls from 12 and 1300. It's about the Bibles that we're reading and how we can be confident in them.
And that really stands out because as you're in Cambridge, you're getting this dichotomy of a place that has shaped who we are today as Christians, but also a place that's become very secular. And that's something that really stood out to me, was now it feels very secular, but inside of that still, you've got people at Tyndale House and these places that are there who are right in the center of biblical apologetics and helping people understand what they believe. You've got people from the ancient, we'll say 800 years and back, back in that piece, who gave their lives because they stood up for what they believed and they were killed for it. And then you've still got today people who are giving their lives and going, we want you to have an answer for what you believe. And sitting in Tyndale House with our group, I will never forget us sitting there and these guys graciously going, would you like a cup of tea? And would you like some cookies? And then going, now let's sit and talk about why the Bible's true and what we're currently working on. And we got a chance to talk through some Assyrian history and things that were found. And that was so cool because the next day we were going to go see it ourselves.
Exactly. And these guys are working on, like I said, world-class project. These are public theologians. These aren't guys inside the bubble trying to preach to the church to try to keep them warm around a small fire. These guys are world-class public theologians, and they know that their findings, what they're promoting as evidence for the scriptures is going to be peer-reviewed by people who are not sympathetic to the faith. And so they have to produce world-class scholarship, and they do. And they put us right on the front seat. Like you said, they put us right at the table of their current projects, which were mind-blowing and honestly continuing to defend the beautiful integrity of the faith. Likewise, they are also there to review those skeptics' findings, and the skeptics who are writing things to attack and destroy the faith that your children and grandchildren are going to be reading at the university. These guys at Tyndale House are ready to peer review. So those guys are the secular world is more reserved in what it's willing to publish because it knows that the Tyndale House scholars will be waiting for them at the gate. So I was really thankful. And like you said, they're just normal, everyday, generous, hospitable people. They're not, even though they're literally and quantifiably some of the smartest people in the world, at the same time, they retained their biblical and Christian generosity and were super kind and hospitable and welcoming to our group. So loved it. Loved to see that faith and practice come into play. And you realize, okay, I can trust the Bible is true. And I don't have to be able to understand Akkadian and Ugaritic and Assyrian and Babylonian and cuneiform, but these guys actually do. And they read those things. And then, like you said, we got to go the next day down to London and see them, these writings and inscriptions in the British Museum and say, oh yeah, okay, that's what they were telling us about. It actually is true. And it goes all the way back to 700 BC, 800 BC, back to the kings that we read about in our Old Testament.
And this is what makes this trip really unique, friends, is that, and I'm going to go back to Cambridge one last time and then we'll move on, but you're going to see this throughout the entire trip. And this is why I loved it so much, is that you're going to walk the ancient streets of a place like Cambridge and you're going to hear the stories of people you didn't even know were important and who probably don't care if you ever knew their name. They were just living their faith. Sure. And we're going to get a chance to hear about them. And then you're going to get a chance to sit with modern day people, such as the Tyndale House guys, and hear what they're doing today. So you're taking the ancient and the modern and you're putting it together. And then we end up back in London. And if you've ever been on any of our trips, we so often make our way through different places in Israel and Turkey or wherever it might be. And we say, this artifact is important and it's a replica. And if you want to see the real thing, you got to go to the British Museum. And I had never been to the British Museum. And so we get a chance to go, and we go with somebody who, the place is huge, who can walk us through the important things that we want to see that pertain to the understanding of our faith, and actually things that like are ways to be able to say our faith can be said is true because these things have been found, and these are things that are mentioned within the Bible. So it's really interesting, really cool, and it was awesome to sit, learn about the Assyrians, and then to sit and see the stele and the different wall carvings that pertain right to the stories of even Hezekiah. So I was in heaven. I was so good.
To be able to realize that there is a footprint of biblical history outside of our Old Testament, right? And there are Assyrian writings and Egyptian writings and other things that are preserved that absolutely corroborate the exact stories in Scripture. And we had a guide who knew exactly which rooms to go to. Like you say, it's multiple floors. There's 8 million artifacts in the British Museum. I forget how many are on display at any one time, but it's in hundreds of thousands. And so we know we're blitzing by things that are interesting to get to the things that actually are eternal of significance.
Like, oh, hey, there's a Rosetta Stone. Like,
yeah,
hey.
Yeah, that's cool. Like the original Rosetta Stone, we're blitzing by it because we want to get to the stele like that has the inscription of the King of Judah, right? Like, okay, buy Rosetta Stone. So many things like that you've read about since you were a child. All the archaeologists went all over the world. The British Empire had a wide reach, and all those artifacts made their way, like you say, back to the British Museum. Not the replicas, the originals, the real thing, and they are still there. And it's beautiful to see, little Akkadian tablets in cuneiform. And oh, by the way, this is a receipt of buying 200 cattle between this Egyptian king and this king mentioned in Scripture. These were real people doing real things. And all it does is it continues to corroborate all of the evidence from our Old Testament. So we're getting Babylonian, Assyrian, some Egyptian artifacts from the ancient Middle East, where they just corroborated the story, and we get to relive that and see the actual original pieces in person. It's just crazy.
And it's us, and this is what I love about it. These things can be on their own overwhelming and kind of boring, but we're going to bring out to you why they're important, and we're gonna just share those things. So you're getting stories that come together, and then also besides British Museum, we're walking around London. You've already done kind of a sightseeing day on your own the day before, but now we're going to walk around and tell the stories about people who stood up for what they believed and how it changed us today. And there are so many people that are there story-wise that we can tell that we're going to help you put those into the places of when they happen. People you've heard of before. I mean, everyone's probably heard of the Wesleys. And so there's tons of people who we get a chance to talk about, some of them dying for their faith and others just living out their faith in their everyday. So
absolutely. And you're right. I mean, so much rich spiritual heritage comes out of London, and the half day, the time we spent walking around was, and seeing the places and the churches was so valuable. You're right. The Wesleys, you've got all your Puritans like Richard Baxter and others who were there. Then you have your early reformers who were there, and many of whom were burned. You have the places where they were burning the writings of the reformers right there in St. Paul's churchyard, and we got to stand next to that and just and reminisce and reflect and think about conflict in the church and conflict in our world around the spiritual world, around religion, around Christianity, and then to think about the challenges that they faced in the medieval world. There's the biblical foundation that we get to look at in the British Museum, Tyndale, Cambridge, and other places, but there's also so many stories, like you say, of challenges that were overcome, whether it was through the Anglo-Saxon period, or then the Normans, and then initially the Romans, and then Anglo-Saxons, and then the Vikings, then the Norman, and then eventually the Tudors, and the constant struggle for life that the Christian faith has survived in England over 1,000 years in the medieval period from 500 to 1500 is mind-blowing. And so to walk the streets and to see where William Wallace even was burned, along with many others, and to just reflect on the conflicts they had, partly political, partly economic, largely spiritual and religious also. And what does that mean for us as men of peace, as people of peace in our modern world? What's important, what's not important? And to reflect with them and to grieve with them, to rejoice with them, and to stand with them and on their shoulders as we go forward. To walk those streets with them was really a hallowed experience.
Don't worry, if all those names that you just heard, you're like, I don't understand a word he just said, you will know.
Yes.
By the end of the trip, why these guys are important. And that's the beauty of a trip like this. Like, if you go on a regular tour, you're going to walk around and a tour guide might mention these different names because they're a part of the history of the area, but you don't understand why they're important. And so that's what's fun about this trip is we take the time to talk about the things that are important and why they're important. And in the pre-trip curriculum, things like that, you will learn these pieces before you go. So it's a great time.
Okay, so Rich, I'm going to interrupt you because I just got to tell one small story. Just as an example of exactly what you're saying. Probably most of you have never heard of the name John Rogers, but you have an English Bible, and you have it thanks to John Rogers, because William Tyndale was the primary translator of the scriptures into English, but he was living under King Henry VIII, who was chasing him down to persecute and kill him. Interestingly, Tyndale fled to the continent, was shielded by a patron, was eventually betrayed, caught, and hung and killed. His writings, however, could have been lost. But thankfully, John Rogers, who had gone to the continent from England as a Catholic chaplain to the business community there, converted to Protestantism, loved Tyndale, gathered his writings, finished the translation, and in Europe printed the first English translation of the scriptures in 1537. Then he came back to England when persecution subsided. And then when it kicked back in under Mary Tudor, whom we know as Bloody Mary, he could have fled, but he stayed. He stayed because he wanted to be with his suffering people. And eventually he, under her, was martyred. But we have a Bible in English thanks to John Rogers. And while we were in London, we got to walk through his church and to see where he was and to stop and pause and pray and thank the Lord just for a moment for the faithful saints who went before us, like John Rogers, whom we will never see, and we will never see until heaven, and mostly not even know about. But we can get glimpses of the people who went before us and the sacrifices they made for us, and to be thankful to them and to God for giving us this great legacy of spiritual help.
These are the stories. I'm telling you, stories every single day as we make our way through that you're just like, didn't know that guy, but I'm so grateful that I have a Bible in my hands and it's in English. So we're going to get a chance to do all of that. We also get to step into the modern again, too, many, many times. Oxford was one of those places for me that really solidified that modern feel. You're walking through an ancient, again, place that's several hundred years old with schooling and all these things. But we spent a good chunk of time telling some stories of martyrs who were there because people were burned at the stake for their faith. But we also spent time talking about guys like C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien. And for me, it was really this moment, because as I was growing up as a kid, my dad would read to me the Chronicles of Narnia series, and so that was my first connection to C.S. Lewis. From there, it spun into reading a bunch of his other works that he had, and he ended up being somebody that I kind of call a friend, even though I've never met him. But I've read so many things from him. And to sit there with our group and to be able to hear the impact that Lewis and Tolkien and some of these different writers had on their lives was just amazing. And then to hear the story as Adam and was telling it of Tolkien helping Lewis get a job, and the reason why he didn't get a job in Oxford, and then realizing if Lewis hadn't done what he did, we wouldn't have had these books that would have gotten to us. And so you want to give just a quick overview of that. I want to spoil it if people go, but this was meaningful.
Yeah. Well, Rich, you're absolutely right. Oxford is a combination of ancient and modern. And actually, Oxford predates Cambridge. Cambridge in 1209 started as an offshoot of Oxford, but we know it probably in our day most broadly for the impact of its modern people. It's 20th century theologians of C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien, who were friends. Of course, Lewis was the agnostic. Tolkien was the Catholic believer who was sharing Christ with Lewis, and then they would take walks together almost daily. And there was a point at which Lewis describes the coins essentially kind of dropping in his soul. And it was on this place called Addison's Walk out behind Magdalen College. And we got to walk Addison's Walk. We got to walk that space where really the light began to shine into to Lewis's soul, and he began to realize that this global fascination with sacrificial love, with a hero who saves at the cost of his own life, that these stories that recur in all of the legends, all of the mythologies around the world, it couldn't just be chance. There must be something deeper in the human condition connecting with this story. He realized there was one story that was true, and it was the source of all these other stories. And that's how he writes about it. And then some of you may be familiar with the famous sermon of Lewis's, The Weight of Glory. We got to walk through the church where he delivered that sermon during the war. We got to be a walk in Magdalen College where he served in Oxford. And like you said, Tolkien was able to secure a position for him in Cambridge. But even though he had been spurned because he wrote for the masses at the cost of his academic career, but he gave us such a great legacy in his Narnia books, Mere Christianity, and all of the books that he wrote that are so helpful to us in our daily lives. And to see those spaces where he worshiped, where he worked. We actually got to go into his church, and we got to visit his grave and just see and go visit his house. We got to sit in his backyard and see what that looked like, and to walk the pond where he would swim, and to see these spaces where he lived, worked, swam, wrote, thought, repented, all of these things that gave us the books that we know and love, and that are continuing to shape our lives.
Yeah, I was humbled in the moments of sitting and listening to people. I'd say a majority of our group had something to share. Most everybody had read Mere Christianity, and that had impacted them. It was just a cool experience. Oxford was a lot of fun. Again, another one of those bringing the ancient to the modern. We then made our way up. This was a stop I wasn't expecting to be something that would be exciting, because when we were in Cambridge, we kind of come in contact with Sir Isaac Newton for a second. And there's all these people trying to take a picture next to an apple tree that is not the actual apple tree, but just an apple tree that was planted, like, to remember him, that was in Cambridge. And then we actually went to his house, and we got a chance to see the place. It's a very humble spot. But Adam's teaching there was sitting there, and Adam, I still remember this. This is one of the things that just stands out to me, is you sitting there going, we all remember Sir Isaac Newton for science. And we all assume that science is opposed, because that's kind of how it feels sometimes, is that science is opposed to Christianity, to our religion, of what we believe, to our beliefs. And for him, it wasn't. Like, his whole reason for exploring science was to understand God in the nuances of what God had created. And then you made this statement: if you took all the writings he ever did on science and you stacked them next to all the writings he ever did on theology, there's more on theology. There's more on his beliefs. So what a cool place.
Yeah, I mean, Sir Isaac Newton, we forget that Sir Isaac Newton wasn't just a scientific marvel, right? He was a human, and he grew up, and we got to go visit his farmstead where he grew up, and where he did his experiments, actually, and where he began to put things together scientifically, but also where he was firmly grounded in his faith, his Christian faith. And there's a verse in the book of Proverbs that says, "It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it's the glory of kings to search it out." And Sir Isaac Newton's faith did not compete with his science. It actually fueled it, because he understood that God had, if you will, coded his glory into creation. He was a God of order, and he did things in an orderly way. And it was our job that he had hidden his glory in all of creation. And it was our job as kings, as thoughts, as philosophers, as teachers, as professors, as scholars, and as Christians, to search it out, to discover it. And so he understood his role, that God had put those things there, and his role was to search them out and to understand how God's amazing and beautiful world works. And that's what fueled it. And he was very open about that, and about his faith. He was a member of the London Royal Society, and actually the president of for many years, and probably the greatest scientist of the second millennium. And yet it was his Christian faith behind it. So I loved going to his farmstead, seeing the simplicity of it, and realizing the greatest scientist of the second millennium was raised here, not only in science, but in the Christian faith, which fueled his science.
Again, you're going to get a story. You're going to get a story of someone you did not know has impacted your faith. And so again, all the time. Something else that was really fun on the trips is that we tried to give people the opportunity to be in worship spaces, to worship with people. And one of those ways that we get to do that is that every day, I didn't know this, but every day there's something called an evensong that happens every day, where people get together and they sing in these cathedrals, and they praise the Lord. And so we try along the way to give an opportunity. I actually went We went to one when we were in York, but then I actually went to one on my own when I was just walking around. I walked into a cathedral and it was starting. So I stepped on in with my buddy John, and we attended the evensong. So you're going to get a chance to do things like that. We got a chance to do it in York in this beautiful cathedral, and it was just, again, amazing to learn the history of the place. Adam, how long have they been worshiping there?
Well, on that site for sure, written records since 627. So in 2 more years, 1,500 years of continuous worship on that site. Fun fact, though, about York. When Constantine became emperor of the Roman Empire in the early 300s AD, he was living in York at the time because his dad, who was emperor, was battling the Picts and everybody north of the wall, right, Hadrian's Wall, and trying to continue the Roman rule there. And he and his mother were living in York in 300 when he became emperor. And she was the driving force behind his faith. And when he called the Ecumenical Council of 314 AD, 1 year after he legalized Christianity in 313, 3 bishops came from York. So there was worship in York in the 300s, almost certainly 200s AD leading into it. So I said only since 627 because that's our written records. But if you actually trace the story back through Constantine and his mother, almost certainly since the late 200s AD, worship in York, probably on that same site. And so now the church that's there is this magnificent medieval cathedral. And we got to, as you say, go to evensong and hear the thundering organ and hear the choir and worship with the saints and join 1,400 years of continuous worship.
That's one small house church that grew up, is what that. Well, we're going to jump a little bit here, just time wise. We got to see a lot of other great places. We went to like Durham Cathedral. Durham is just a powerhouse of a place. Again, the storylines of who you learn about when you're there, it sets you up for all the things that we're going to see. Actually, it's a lot of the history of what we've already seen, but then it's more history on the places that we're heading to as we head up into Scotland. But we ended up at a place, as you just mentioned, called Hadrian's Wall. And when you first told me about this, I was like, I got to see this place, because you hear about Rome and you hear about all roads lead to Rome and all roads lead from Rome. And Rome stretches out. And it is kind of inconceivable in my head that the Roman Empire came all the way into this area. Now, I know that it is because we quote many different people who speak about taking over England and Britain and this whole area. And they talk about how a lot of it they didn't have to do with sword because they just got everybody to love the food, going to to see all the theaters. They basically took on their culture, and at that, they took over the entire region. But you see this there where this wall is built with Roman forts, and it looks just like other places I've seen with Roman pieces there. So how long's that wall been there?
The wall has been there since 122 AD. 17 was the peak of the Roman Empire, its reach. 122, they built the wall between England and Scotland. So they have a pretty well preserved Roman outpost. This is about an 80-mile wall at its origin. I think they said it was 12 feet high and 8 feet wide. I mean, so it was a monstrous event to do this. And it basically defined the edge of the Roman Empire. And as you said, all roads lead to Rome, all roads lead from Rome. And if you've been on one of the GTI Israel tour trips, which you should definitely do, then you see the impact of Rome on our biblical world. Mm-hmm. And you see here the impact of Rome on our historical world. Like since then, since the first century, it continued to, in fact, Rome occupied Britain longer than any power. And there was a huge impact of Rome. And so to see that impact all the way out in Britain and to understand that the gospel in many ways got to Britain probably because of the Roman occupation early on. They had roads there, they had order there, they had law there, they had ways to move around the empire, so that when the persecution broke out in Jerusalem, there's a way for folks to get there. And some have even speculated that it was the Roman soldiers that first brought the gospel to Britain. And so we got to see the physical evidence of Rome there and imagine what that meant for the country.
I love being able to teach the fullness of time teaching. We do it on every trip that we do, every place that we go. God brings all these pieces together when the timing is right so the gospel can spread, and we get a chance to see it in that location. We then ended up in a place, and we got to highlight this one just because it's so unique. And this is a spot where you had to drive across a causeway that, depending on the tides, is completely like covered. So there's no way. So part of the day it's an island, part of the day it's kind of a swampland around it. But you can drive to it at certain parts of the day. And it's this spot where a monastery was created, where people came here to be able to begin to spread the gospel, copy the Bible in these beautiful, beautiful, like illuminated Bibles that are so gorgeous, even to today. Like when you see one, you're just like, whoa, how much time and artistry that takes to do. But we got a chance to go there, and it was a pretty incredible place. So why don't you tell us a little bit? Is it, I always say it wrong, Lindisfarne? Is that how do you
Lindisfarne.
say it?
That's right.
Yeah.
Well done.
All right.
Yeah, good job. Yeah, so Lindisfarne or Holy Island is probably easier to say, but that's what it is. And you're right. It is tidal. It is cut off for half the time, and even now there's no bridge. There's just the road that's covered, and so we have to time it to get there. But what happened was King Oswald, who was the Anglo-Saxon king, was captured by Scots over on the west coast of Scotland, came to faith through the influence of monks living among them on the western coast of Scotland, who had come over initially from St. Patrick in the 400s. They're at a monastery called Iona. He eventually escaped, got back to his kingdom, and he sent word back to send monks from there to be his personal chaplain in Northumbria, in Lindisfarne, in that region of northeastern England, and so they could be his chaplains, and they could minister to his family and his people and be the launching point for Christianity in the northeast of England. And we take for granted the fact that Christianity just keeps going, but it keeps going because of people like King Oswald, who was kidnapped, who learned Scottish. And then when he came back and he invited the monks, they spoke they spoke Scottish, he spoke Anglo-Saxon, and there was one person among them who could translate, him. And so he translated for the monks so they could get the gospel out to his people. And that's where it started in 635. Again, so another 1400 years almost of worship in that place, and the stories, like you say, that came out from them, including the Venerable Bede was there nearby and in and out of there, and other monks who, as you say, they copied the Gospels for us to proliferate them so that when the barbarians and the Vikings came through, and they did, and they burned things and stole things, there would still be copies of the scripture left somewhere, somehow, for us to enjoy today. And so these people did that. They managed to promote the faith, to keep the faith under hardship, to persevere, and then also to maintain the scriptures and to multiply the scriptures. I mean, nowadays we keep it on our hard drives, we keep it on our phones, we keep it in the cloud, we got 1,000 Bibles on our shelves, but that wasn't like that back then. The printing press wasn't until 1440. Everything was by hand, and they did the hard work of maintaining those things in hard spaces like Lindisfarne, and we get to go there and see that and picture what life was like for them. And again, to be thankful to God and those who went before us.
Again, the stories, I had no clue that the gospel was spread because a guy was captured, taken away. He learns the gospel. He comes back. He not only comes back, but he brings it to his entire region. And then he brings people in, and those people copy the scriptures because you don't have very many copies, and people are coming in and killing you all the time and burning your places, and you're losing your scriptures. So they're trying to make as many as possible. Just amazing stories. And especially when we think that, wow, the life we live in today is very difficult to be a Christian. You go, it is, it can be, but there are those who've come before us. We'll just finish this off here because we again, I hope you're getting the picture of amazing stuff. We finished up in Edinburgh, which I think is like my new favorite place. Like, it's just awesome. And walking around, and this is where like some of the stories that I had already known kind of came together, which was really cool because they kind of, for me, solidified at the end of the trip. But getting a chance just to make our way through and hear about John Knox, and to be in a place where some very significant decrees came about that impact the church today and who we are, and things that I think we take for granted. So, maybe a 1-minute synopsis as we like kind of finish this up of of Edinburgh, and then we'll kind of finish off with our take over the trip.
Absolutely. I think the legacy that John Knox and the Scottish Church gave us is basically a defense of the biblical model of individual church eldership. And so that a church shouldn't be overruled by the state. It shouldn't, Mary, Queen of Scots, and John Knox were the right. And Mary said, I fear the prayers of John Knox more than all the Armada. And what happened was that John Knox stood for, and the Scottish Church stood for, the rights of the individual churches to worship as they saw fit and to pursue the missions that they saw fit. And at the end of the day, they succeeded. And they gave us the legacy of being responsible stewards of the faith that God gave us, and pursuing the missions and the passions and the gifts that he put into our own hearts as individuals and as a church together as the body of Christ. He gave us that legacy, and we are getting to live that legacy today.
Yep. So every day we are learning on the trip. We're seeing amazing architecture. Things that if you're going to go to Europe, you got to see it. Got to see these things. We're learning about our Christian faith. We're learning about people who went before us. We're getting a biblical foundation. We're learning about these saints who went before us and how they persevered and how they were kept and how God took care of them. And we're learning about the impact on our culture today and what we can do with it. All of that wrapped into the fact that we're jumping in the Bible each day and just kind of cementing ourselves in some biblical passages to help us understand these truths even more. I'm telling you, friends, between that and a good English breakfast, what else do you need? Any final thoughts, Adam? Like, again, an amazing trip. We're going to be running more. We're going to be doing another one. So check out in the show notes. It'll take you to our blog of the trip we just went on, so you can see what it looked like. And you also can go to the website link that'll let you sign up for the trip, and you can check out the overview video that gives you a good idea of what it's all like. So last thoughts.
Yeah, last thoughts. I think you're absolutely right, Rich. If you're thinking about a trip, why not go on this trip? Because you'll do all the fun, cool, amazing stuff, and your faith will be fueled, because the three big points I think that stand out to me are just the foundation of the scriptures to the church that we have are true. We get to see the evidences of those things. As secondly, to see the perseverance of the saints through difficult times and not take it for granted, and to see those who went before us and hear their stories and be encouraged that the folks who went before us were faithful. And so we also can be faithful. And then thirdly and finally, the impact of the church on culture, and to see the writings of a Charles Spurgeon or a Charles Darwin compared to the literature that came out, and even the reformers and the abolition of slavery, and the impact of the church on culture was magnificent. Sir Isaac Newton, of course, but then William Wilberforce, and all the global abolitionist movement started in England. And so much of the impact of culture is rooted in British Christianity, and our own faith is rooted in British Christianity. And so we get to see, we always say we stand on the shoulders of giants. And I would just say, let me come introduce you to them. Come and meet them with me and see who they are, so that we can thank God for them and thank them in our own lives, to be strengthened in our faith as we continue our own journeys.
I love that you finished it off by just throwing the nugget of like a William Wilberforce with the slaves and helping abolitionists, like the whole movement, and as well as Spurgeon versus Darwin. Folks, come on the trip. You'll learn about these things, and just again, you're gonna walk away with a better knowledge of your faith, your Bible, your history, and I think that it's well worth your time. So, Adam, thanks again for jumping on this podcast.
You bet, Rich. Love you and GTI. Appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
All right, friends. Until the next podcast, take care.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. For more information on upcoming GTI study tours, please find us on the web at www.gtitours.org.